Rachel, it is a treat to be back at Magers and Quinn. As someone who lived not too far from here for many years, I now live in St. Paul, but it's a treat to be back in the old neighborhood and to see Magers and Quinn thriving, and Jeff to be here with you. You know, I started writing about abortion when I was a journalism student at Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I think the first story I wrote on abortion was in 1971. I can't believe we're kind of right back to where we were then in so many ways. So thanks for coming, folks, and we are speaking to a video audience as well, so welcome to those listeners. Jeff, people always ask whenever I'm talking about a book, why did you write the book? Why don't you talk about why you wrote this book and why you wrote it now?
So the name of the book, What Should I Do, is intended to be on several levels. The first certainly is when a woman has an unintended pregnancy and she is considering what she thinks is best for her to do. It is considering all the different aspects, and so the question, what should I do, is in relationship to that. But the further part that really applies to all of us in our society is the idea that abortion is a difficult subject. It's not one that we easily discuss with other members of our society or even other members of our family. And my intention in writing the book was to try to create a framework that might help in terms of furthering that discussion. And so, as I say, there were various reasons. As a family physician, I saw women who were in all kinds of different situations. I saw the people who wanted to have a pregnancy, who had difficulty achieving pregnancy. I saw people who never intended to get pregnant, who had that unintended pregnancy, and everything in between. And because of the many difficult circumstances that came about, I had thought about writing something along this line probably 20 years ago, and the idea had sat on the shelf for a long time, and then it was around a year ago that I felt there was more of an urgency given the debate that was going in our country and the different court cases that were being held and so forth. And so I ended up finishing writing the book in late September, early October of last year. It was published in about December. The latest Supreme Court case regarding abortion came out then on June 24th. I think our country will continue to have further debate about the issue because it affects so many people, and so many have strongly held beliefs that are in conflict with one another. And so part of my book is to try to encourage healthy discussion about those different points of view, and in the context of our democratic society and our Constitution that includes key issues such as freedom of religion, right to privacy, due process under the law, etc., that may mean going forward for us.
It strikes, this is a fine book, folks. I really recommend it. Jeff has packed a lot of information, a lot to think about, a lot to talk about into this book. And it's written like a discussion guide, so it's intended for us to do what citizens should be doing in a democracy, to talk through major issues, shared issues of concern with our fellow citizens. This book would be a dandy one for any discussion group to use to proceed to take up, as you said, a topic that's been difficult sometimes to talk about. People are bound to be wondering, where did you come down on this? Are you pro-choice or pro-life? And toward the end of the book, you do call yourself pro-choice / pro-life. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I think it's one that I'm continuing to explain as I discuss it with others and realize how people would interpret what I have written. So my bottom line conclusion is that I believe that being pro-choice is more pro-life than the standard typical pro-life position. But that's where it's not something that you can answer in one sentence or one paragraph or even one chapter in a book. I believe that if our society as a whole promotes the idea that we try to reduce the incidence of unintended pregnancy, and there are a variety of ways that we could do much more as a society to do that, that would lessen the need for abortion. And yet at the same time, there are many court rulings and laws and so forth that actually make it harder for women and men to access contraception. I also try to make the point in the book that this is an issue that is, men are as responsible as women are for unintended pregnancies. It would seem like an obvious statement, but it seems to be often forgotten when people talk about someone dealing with an unintended pregnancy. And so first I would say that we can do many things as society to promote the idea that we can reduce the incidence of unintended pregnancy. Once pregnancy occurs, whether it's intended or unintended, is a huge effect on how the individual woman often perceives the situation. If you're trying to get pregnant and you've been working hard to get pregnant, it's a very joyful, happy thing, and you are willing to take on risks because you want to achieve that goal. If you have an unintended pregnancy and your risk of dying from taking that pregnancy to childbirth can vary anywhere from 20 to 80 times higher than the risk it would be for you to have an elective abortion, then we have to consider what is the situation in society. Do we have the right to force someone to take the path that we think is the right path for them? So there are a combination of issues. The other thing is that I would look at the idea of longitudinally. Folks who are strongly in terms of the pro-life position frequently refer to the fetus as the unborn baby and talk about babies being killed. And I respect the folks that believe that way and think that way, but I also know that there are many people, including myself, that don't have that individual belief, and that's where I talk about the idea of what does it mean if we have freedom of religion in our society, and how does that impact the issue of abortion. But coming back to the term then pro-choice, pro-life, if we reduce the incidence of unintended pregnancies, if we give support to people in a whole variety of ways, it's entirely possible that the number of abortions does decrease. I understand the stated purpose of many pro-lifers is to reduce the number of abortions. And yet some of the other laws and regulations that have been passed by the same political group actually increase the number of unintended pregnancies, and that's the tragic thing.
You come at this as a practicing physician and a man of faith, and I admire that you talk about both faith and physical phenomenon, medical practice in your book. The medical emphasis is something that I think had been lacking from much of our debate over the last 50 years about this procedure. You have a number of case studies in your book that help illuminate the variety of experiences that women can have in connection with pregnancy and the decision regarding an abortion. Your book emphasizes the high risks associated with childbirth and the relatively lesser risks of abortion, and that's information I'm not sure a lot of people have. Can you say a bit more about how that has informed your thinking?
Certainly. I think it partly comes from the number of times where I've seen people have difficult circumstances. Out of the 9 cases that I put in the book, the first case I include was actually about my wife having our first pregnancy. She had an entirely normal pregnancy. She got to the end of that pregnancy and our son was in the breech position, and she had to have a C-section in order for a safe delivery, because if you do a delivery where the bottom comes first and the head comes last, there's too many times where the head gets hung up and the baby can have very severe problems and or die as a result of that type of birth. So it's very common to have a cesarean section when you have a first-time delivery in the breech position. And then unfortunately there were a variety of complications that occurred from that cesarean section, and about a week to 9 days or so after that C-section had been done, she had a situation where she almost died. So when I think about the fact that she was entirely healthy, entirely normal through the whole pregnancy, and then that happened to someone that I knew near and dear and loved, I realized this can happen to anyone. And so then when you're taking a look at how do we make decisions, the idea of do I have the right, if I were to say be strongly pro-life and tell someone that they don't have the option of of taking the safer course for them. There's not any other situation that I can think of in our society where we force someone to take the riskier approach in life. In other words, we force them to take the higher risk of death. The only one that I've been able to think about is when we have the situation of forcing someone to be in the military. In other words, when the draft occurred and someone's in the military and they serve in the military and have a higher risk of dying in conflict when they did not want to be in the military. But in that situation, that's something that's for national security. Our Constitution clearly supports the idea that we do what we need to do for national security. When it comes to a woman having a pregnancy and an unplanned pregnancy, that is not national security. It's a totally different situation. So that's where I have difficulty with the idea that we take away the option for an individual to take the safer course in their life if they have a difficult situation to deal with.
Of course, a lot of people have been misinformed and think that abortion is as dangerous as childbirth. That's not true, is it?
No, the studies are quite clear. I mean, I have a section and a chapter in the book called Medical Facts, and the medical facts are very, very clear, and the studies have been repetitive over the last 40, 50 years. The chance for a woman to die from an elective abortion in our country today is less than 1 out of 100,000. It's about 1 out of 200,000 women having an elective abortion can have that, obviously a very serious side effect. But the part that you need to understand then is that if a woman takes a pregnancy to labor and delivery, which then would be required if we had no option for abortion in our country, the average woman in our country has a risk of about 17 out of 100,000 of dying from that journey. Now that's the average woman. There are parts of our population that have a much higher risk than that. The Native Americans have 28 to 30 out of 100,000 times where women die. The folks who are the Black Americans, their risk is in the 45 to 48 range out of 100,000. So there are a whole variety of reasons why there are differences. Certainly there can be genetic differences, there can be situational differences, whether someone's in a rural area or an urban area, all kinds of reasons. But the bottom line is that the data is very, very clear that taking a pregnancy to term and delivering that pregnancy is a much higher risk to the individual than it is to have an elective abortion.
Well, you were a practicing physician in the state for 38 years. So you saw a lot of experiences through the years. Help us understand what it has been like to practice medicine in a state where abortion is legal, was legal, is still legal in Minnesota because of our Supreme Court's decision back in 1995, the Gomez decision. Is abortion routine in Minnesota?
I would not call it routine at all from my perspective. And the challenge is that there are still a variety of hurdles. If an individual is considering abortion, first of all, it would be uncommon for you to be able to have your primary physician, your family physician, or your obstetrician do the procedure for you or even prescribe the medication for you. Because of the nature of the politics and the current laws in Minnesota, there are only a few providers, a few clinics, most of them here in the metro area, very few outstate, that actually provide that service. And the ones that do provide that service, I think you are all aware, are often heavily picketed, and so if someone goes to such a clinic, they know that they're not just going to walk in the clinic, they're likely going to have someone outside that clinic telling them that they're doing something wrong.
Well, and now we have abortion illegal in a number of states. Not yet in Minnesota. We hope not. I hope not ever yet in Minnesota, but we don't know. It's a matter of political consideration at this point. What does it mean for doctors in Minnesota to have abortion becoming illegal in states all around us?
I understand that it's likely that there will be more women from other states who travel to this state to have the procedure done, and that the clinics that handle that procedure are likely trying to anticipate that and be ready to try to provide that service for women that come from other states. what people oftentimes don't understand is that that actually ends up being a higher risk situation for the woman traveling, because there's very commonly delays that are involved in that. Delays in getting an appointment, delays in being able to travel. And the longer you go in pregnancy, if you were to get to the latter part of pregnancy, at that point the risk of abortion becomes much closer to the risk of labor and delivery. So the safest abortion occurs in the first 3 months of pregnancy. That's the lowest risk. I think so. In trying to express what I think are some key concepts here, because I respect. I have a number of friends who are strongly pro-life, from different parts. Like when I went to med school, residency, practice, etc. And I respect that someone has that individual belief where they think that it's wrong for abortion to occur. And while I respect that individual belief greatly, the part that I have difficulty with is the idea that we would have the right to force our individual belief on the rest of society. Now, if we lived in a country where we didn't have freedom of religion, at least according to what the Constitution says, then it would be different. There are definitely countries around the world where they have a state religion. Many of the residents of this country purposely came to this country because they were leaving a country where there was a state religion that they disagreed with. And so when our country was founded, a part of the First Amendment to the Constitution specifically expressed that there was the right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So obviously that was a very, very key part of the forming of the Constitution. Now, in the last Supreme Court ruling that was published then on June 24th, Justice Samuel Alito was the Supreme Court justice who wrote that opinion. In that opinion, he wrote that there was no history in our country of abortion being a part of our society. He went to great lengths to talk about the status of abortion laws back in 1868, when the 14th Amendment was approved as an amendment to the Constitution. He did not talk at all about the last 50 years and the numerous states that have legalized abortion as a part of their, or the number of polls that show that the majority of Americans support the right of a woman to choose what to do in some of these difficult situations. So it made me unfortunately feel like it was a very biased type of approach where the decision had been made and then they tried to look at how to give it a legal backing. Even in the different, if you read through the entire, it's like a 230 or 240 page opinion, and I believe that he wrote the first 180 pages or so, and then the 3 dissenting judges wrote the latter part of it. But there is not anything that I saw by any of the Supreme Court justices referring to this idea that it violates our freedom of religion to have a prohibition on abortion. I mean, I take my Christian faith very, very seriously. I believe that God does not think that abortion is altogether wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who gets pregnant should have an abortion. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's simply that in those difficult circumstances, when it was not an intended pregnancy, and a woman's trying to decide with her family, with her physician, what is best for her to do, the loving God that I know would not be throwing fire and brimstone down and telling her to not do that. So I basically feel like when that Supreme Court ruling happened, I don't have freedom of religion in my country anymore. And there are millions of people who believe the same way that I do. So this is going to continue to be a debate in our society. It's not the last word on it. And I don't believe that, personally, that states should be able to decide by themselves, because this is a country where we are united. We are the United States of America. We do have to have a way of talking about difficult ethical issues, and something that is ongoing. It's not like we have to decide this in one day, but we need to have a format where we all respect each other. And I respect those pro-life people I don't respect the idea that they want to force their faith and religion on me or those who believe the way that I do.
Well, that's what I've admired about this book, is that you do a nice job of bringing both arguments of faith, freedom of religion, and arguments of medicine to bear on this question, both of which, as you point out, have not been much emphasized. The fact that that long Supreme Court opinion that was issued on June 24th makes no mention of the First Amendment freedom of religion is sort of stunning to me, given how deeply involved religion is in the shaping of this opinion. I so much also admire your call for Americans to talk through this issue. What would you like to see happen now? It seems to me we're a long ways from consensus, though the polls do show there is a clear majority in favor of keeping abortion legal in most circumstances. We're a long ways from consensus, and this is one of the issues that you can imagine dividing the country more seriously than it already is. What should happen next?
Well, I certainly believe that we all need to continue to respect each other. I believe that our country is and will continue to be a leader around the world. I think that there are many reasons for me to believe that it's necessary for our country to lead the world in a whole variety of challenges, whether it be the global warming, whether it be overpopulation, whether it be national defense. When you look at how countries like Russia and China behave, etc., we need to be a country that, even though we have differences of opinion on major issues, that we are able to work together. And so I believe that we need to continue to have encourage folks to represent us in our legislatures, both at the state and the national level, who are able to be respectful and thoughtful of everyone. It doesn't mean you can't agree with everyone about every position. That's simply not possible. But we can try to respect each other. And obviously, especially in this last, 5, 6, 10 years, that's been increasingly a challenge to do that. But at the same time, I think I've seen plenty of examples where I'm proud to be an American. I continue to see people who I think are truly patriotic. To me, the patriotic person is the person who takes the time to be involved in politics, to be involved in continuing to express what they believe is the right thing to do, to try to get others, get everyone to vote. We need to have a high level of voter participation in our society. It's not good if we have laws that suppress voting or make it more difficult to vote. That does not help out our democracy. I understand that we want to make sure that we don't have fraudulent voting, but every study that has been done about fraudulent voting shows that it is almost non-existent. It happens, but it's a very small percentage. And at least in the last presidential election, there's not been any data to say that it was a fraudulent election. So it is a challenge to continue to try to respect people at the same time that we try to pursue fact-based decisions.
How would you feel about the patchwork that we now have of different states taking different positions on this issue? How do you feel about that being the permanent state of affairs on abortion?
I don't believe it's going to be the permanent state. I think that one of two things will happen. I think that either at some point there will be a majority in Congress that passes a law that basically codifies the Roe versus Wade decision that happened back in 1973. The other possibility is that a different composition of the Supreme Court down the line makes a decision that says that this current Dobbs versus Jackson decision was egregiously wrong in the terms of Justice Alito when he talked about the 73 Roe versus Wade decision. I respect that he is a learned scholar. He cares deeply. I know that that's the case. I simply think that there's times where we can have blinders on that keep us from seeing the obvious.
I think it'd be good to invite the audience here to join us now for some questions and some additional conversation on this topic. Who would like to join our conversation here? Anybody? We should have had our spouses ready with a question.
I'm going to ask a question because I would like to, anybody who would be interested, but this term that I came up with, this concept of pro-choice, pro-life, and I don't know, because I got to believe that even though I tried to further explain it, is there anyone who would like to say what they heard me say, or what did they think about that term? Because I honestly think that, and this is where let me just take a moment to read a part of the chapter from my book about pro-choice, pro-life. So I say, this position advocates the availability of effective contraception for any man or woman who desires it. All persons have a responsibility to be honest and responsible in their sexuality in any relationship. Men have as much responsibility for contraception as women do. The appropriate use of contraception reduces the incidence of unintended pregnancy. When unintended pregnancy occurs, it is the responsibility of the person or persons affected to discuss with their healthcare provider and loved ones and to decide the best course of action for that individual. I go on to talk about some other things, but again, as I mentioned, I would be interested in feedback from any, and again, no matter what view you have, I appreciate it, I respect it. But the idea then, in other words, is pro-choice truly the more pro-life position, or is it not?
This is the kind of fence-straddling position, nomenclature that has gotten a few legislators in trouble over the years. I could name a few names from 20 or 30 years ago. But I think what you're trying to say, Dr. Nelson, is that a respectful position, respectful of all the lives concerned in these questions, it has to include options. And the only way that can happen in our society is if we honor the separation of church and state and keep the law as neutral as possible on all of this. I was going to ask you, and kind of forgot to do so, about your thoughts about the status of separation of church and state in the United States. It seems to me this issue is in some ways calling on us, tacitly calling on us, to reconsider what it means to live in a society that practices separation of church and state.
That's a good point, and actually in my book, one of the things I quoted was an article from 2017 from USA Today. There's a Jewish rabbi by the name of Danya Ruttenberg who has written a lot about this issue, and even at that time, even before this most recent ruling, she was writing that the various things that had been decided were violating the concept of separation of church and state. And I think that is the hard reality. So again, I respect the people that have their individual religious beliefs that think that abortion is entirely wrong and would never consider it at all for themselves. It's simply that when you then force that on the entire population and you're forcing a variety of situations where it creates more risk for an individual. What if we think about a woman that has 2 children and she has an unintended pregnancy happen, and no, she doesn't really, she's having a difficult, but she does not have the means to support another child. She is struggling to support the 2 children that she has, and in that circumstance, if we force her to carry that pregnancy to term, she has a higher risk of dying. So we have a higher risk that those 2 children don't end up with a mother. And so does society have the right to force someone to take that course? Again, it doesn't mean that, I am not at all saying that society should encourage any woman to have an abortion. That is not at all what I am saying. I am simply saying that each individual needs to struggle with their own beliefs, religious, ethical beliefs, etc., and decide what they think is best to do for their circumstance. It's fascinating that there are it's hard to think of another circumstance where we have society telling a patient that they just don't have the option of pursuing a certain type of health care. Libby's a physician, and we've had a lot of good discussions about this because, there are times, say, if someone comes in with the terminal cancer and they want to have the latest treatment available, there are times where they are not given the option of having that treatment. Those situations are, they don't happen often, and it's another example of when if someone's not got any restriction on their financial resources, they often have the option of doing things that most of us don't have. again, if we're in a society that we claim to be a free society, we claim to have equal access, in terms of healthcare and equal access to due process of law, I think that some of these inconsistencies are just not justifiable.
Anyone with a question here? Or comment?
Jeff, I was wondering if you could say a bit more about, maybe misquoting you here, but you said something about along the lines that being pro-choice is more of a pro-life position than strictly being pro-life. Can you say a bit more about that?
Certainly. So when you use the standard term pro-life, that's only talking about the fetus, or if you want to use the term that's the unborn baby. That's only looking at it from that perspective. It's not at all looking at it at the woman's perspective who has the unintended pregnancy. So I understand that it is a reasonable goal, especially by the folks who are strong pro-lifers, to try to minimize and reduce the number of abortions. What I'm saying then is that if that's truly the goal, then we would expect there to be wide support for contraception, and wide support for supportive care for a woman during pregnancy and following pregnancy and labor and delivery. Unfortunately, in most of the states where there are laws that are more, quotes, pro-life, or in other words, there are more abortion restrictions, those same states typically have very poor coverage in terms of their state laws and regulations that have to do with providing contraception or with care for a woman after labor and delivery, or for helping the woman with the unintended pregnancy to have good prenatal care. So, again, I'm making a generalization. One always has to be careful when you make generalizations, because you can find the local situation of the local state or whatever where it's not the case. But at least in what I have read, and I try to read from a variety of sources, that does tend to be the case. So I think, first of all, in terms of the situation of the current time right now, I would say that if we're truly looking at life as a whole, that I think allowing pro-choice actually is more supportive of life than the strict pro-life approach. The second thing is that I ask you all to think longitudinally over a period of time. When I think about and I have a chapter in the book that's about the issue of the overpopulation of our world and the fact that we have fixed resources. I can't prove this, but my premise is that if we have good healthcare available for all women around the world, excellent availability of contraception, we reduce the number of unintended pregnancies, we do reduce the number of people that need to even consider abortion, we allow abortion when a woman thinks that it's appropriate to do, and we, by having effective contraception and having control of the population on a voluntary basis, nothing forced like was done in China, that's ridiculous, but on a voluntary basis, I believe that we have a much better chance of having many more humans live on planet Earth over time than what will happen if we don't do that. I think at this point in time, the so-called pro-life approach would have more risk of overpopulation, more risk of maternal death, more risk of all of us dying because of the results of there being too many of us on the planet. So does that answer your question, Mark?
It gets at it, yes, it does. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, there was a study, I just received an email today from someone about a study, I think in the New England Journal of Medicine, that makes exactly the points that you make, that states that with the biggest abortion restrictions now are also the states that have the poorest prenatal care available to mothers, and postnatal care in a variety of ways, and supports for families too.
I think for me, the important part of that is considering what's happening to the mother, rather than just the child or the fetus. And I think that's a very important consideration.
I need to just mention one other statistic is that worldwide, there are between 60 to 70 million women who have an abortion every year. And the studies have shown, because there's various countries where women have access and women don't have access, and then times where that has changed between being able to get abortions and not being able to get abortions. What happens is that there are many more women who have unsafe abortions when it becomes outlawed. It does not stop abortions. So if you want to reduce the number of abortions, outlawing abortion is not the way to do that. It is by making sure that contraception is easily available. In the countries around the world where there is the lowest incidence of maternal death, countries like the Netherlands and New Zealand, they have easily available contraception, and they also have easily available abortion for women who have unintended pregnancies. So the facts would say that the legal approach to trying to outlaw abortion doesn't stop abortion. It does increase the number of women who end up having unsafe abortions, which results in a higher risk of death.
Well, there's a feminist thread that runs through this issue pretty strongly, though you didn't explicitly go there in this book. I'm going to invite you to go explicitly there now. Those of us who have been fighting those feminist arguments for a long time certainly see this issue as right in that wheelhouse, and understand the position that wants to outlaw abortion as a position that is not friendly to the full personhood of women. Say a bit about how you perceive misogyny to be part of this story.
So, I mean, I think I kind of summed it up at the end of the book when I was writing in my acknowledgments, because I said that men and patriarchal societies have made the decisions for most countries and throughout most of humanity. There are very few examples of societies that were led primarily by women or by equal men and women participation. To me, the joy of our current era, and throughout my lifetime, I was born in the 50s, is the idea that women and men should be equal. I want my partner to be my equal. I do not want my wife or partner, whatever, to be someone who feels like they are totally subject to my demands or my decisions. We always make better decisions when we consider what the other person is thinking and feeling. At least in my experience, it's always ended up with a better outcome. So I purposely have avoided the feminist argument because it's been around for 50 years, and to my surprise, there weren't enough women who supported it to have it become the majority opinion.
But it is the majority.
Well, excuse me, no, but I guess that's where we mean, when we talk about what I mean by majority, excuse me, because I think the term feminist and feminism, and when I talk about the right for choosing abortion, so I don't mean to contradict you on that, Lori. I think what I mean to say is that we still have enough times where some parts of our society believe that men should still be in control, which I don't agree with. I mean, I think it's been good to see more women in leadership, whether it's in medicine or in law or in corporations. It doesn't mean that women are perfect. Women have as many challenges as men have. But it just means in my mind that the more that we have equal participation, the better chance that we come out with a better outcome.
Well, and that makes me, there's a question in the back. Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to hear your definition of unintended pregnancy, unintentional.
Okay. And forgive me
I
because
mean, I can think of many different things
yeah.
that would say it's unintentional, but I'd like to hear your.
Sure. So first of all, an intended pregnancy, in that circumstance, the couple wants to have a pregnancy happen. They purposely do not use contraception because they're hoping that the result of their sexual activity results in a pregnancy. They want to have a child together. Unintended can take many, many forms. Unintended can be the person who's just being lackadaisical about, they really don't want to or mean to get pregnant, but they're not the type of personality, they're not an obsessive compulsive person who makes sure that they have their contraception available. And then that's where I talk about the idea that the man has as much responsibility as the woman does. Because so many times it's been the idea that, well, woman didn't use contraception, she must want to get pregnant. Excuse me, I saw plenty of circumstances where that was not the case. And then where the man didn't want to take any responsibility for the results of his part of the process. So I would say that unintended can mean a lot of different types of situations. Thanks, Guy. Did that answer your question?
Put a
At least
little
somewhat?
Somewhat.
One of the things your book points out is that contraception is not foolproof, and that's part of the story too.
And yes, very true. When you look at the range of effectiveness of contraception, the types of contraception that are most effective would be the two permanent methods. For the male, vasectomy; for the female, the tubal ligation. Even those two methods can have failure. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. When you look on the other end of the spectrum, use of either the rhythm method or withdrawal, studies would say that easily 15 to 20% of couples over a year's time using those methods will have a pregnancy happen. So that's a pretty high rate of failure. And then everything in between. Even the birth control pill, which has been around since the 1950s and has been a very effective, when taken appropriately for the right person, the failure rate of that, if taken appropriately, is on the order of 1 out of 200 to 1 out of 100 per year. But then when you look at the real world results of everyone who has been prescribed oral contraception and how often do they have a pregnancy happen despite that, it's more in the 5 to 10% range. It's not the 1 out of 200 that's the ideal.
Any other questions? Yes.
Jeff, my question is, not being a doctor, I don't know how this all works, but when you are telling a woman that she's pregnant, who brings up the topic of options?
So in that circumstance, when I would see someone in the office, because they come in usually for what's called confirmation of pregnancy. They are wondering whether or not they're pregnant, and they, in the years in the past when we didn't have the easy availability of the home pregnancy tests, you know, the test was done in the office. And even times when it's done at home, there are a variety of technical factors where it may end up giving it. It's uncommon to get a false positive. It's more common to have a false negative. But so when someone would come in, many times you got an idea from them just in how they were presenting the situation on whether they were hoping to be pregnant or whether they were fearing being pregnant. And so certainly depending on how clearly they brought up the issue, then that affected how I would talk with the individual. If someone was saying that they clearly wanted to be pregnant, of course you said congratulations to them when you came back in with the test result and so forth. But always whenever I was unsure, then I would simply say, okay, your test is positive, negative, whatever, and then what are you thinking? How do you feel? You try to use those general questions to get them to respond and give you an idea of what they're thinking, because again, I didn't feel like it was not my place, it was not my right to be saying what they should be doing. It was to try to understand. And I think one of the things that I saw frequently was that when someone came in, I think there were many times they presumed the doctor thought they should not end a pregnancy, because I would have to say there were more times where I had women who I was letting them know they were pregnant. I was asking them, you know, what do they want to do, whatever, and they would say they wanted to schedule a first OB appointment, and then they would not follow up, and I would find out later in some fashion that they had had an abortion. And so I think it was that idea that many people thought that it was inappropriate for them to be considering abortion, even though I don't believe that I had said or behaved in a way to imply that I thought they should do something. Again, you know, you never know how you come across to another person. There's many times our communication is such a challenge with people that we know well and we easily talk with and so forth. But so I tried to approach it in that non-biased way to give them the chance to express what they were thinking and feeling.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Sure, yeah.
So when we were having, once you had sussed out the woman's position, did you have conversations about options with the father and the mother? Because earlier now you said that the men have to have responsibility.
Sure. So, first of all, when you have a woman with an unplanned pregnancy, there are a variety of ways that can come about. And if they were raped, if they were a victim of incest, if it was the kind of thing where they had a partner where it was a one-night stand or where it was a short relationship, there was no ongoing relationship, one could not assume you knew what kind of relationship the woman had. And so if I knew the person, say I knew they were married or they, whatever, that was different. If it was someone that I didn't know well, you try to understand again what they're thinking and feeling, and so trying to ask those opening questions to give them a chance to say. Now, when it boils down to it, though, in that circumstance, the woman is the one who's pregnant because it's her body and her risk in terms of what she chooses to do. I think it's fine if she wants input from whatever male was involved, but I don't believe that the male has the option of telling her either you can't have an abortion or you should have an abortion. Both of those, I believe, would be wrong because it's the, now if you could take that pregnancy and put it in the man and then have him make the decision, okay. We don't have a way of doing that right now.
Any other questions today?
I'm a little unbiased because I'm Jeff's younger sister, but I just want to thank you for writing the book. I think I really appreciate that it stirs conversation, stirs discussions, and I hope that it will spark more conversations and have a rippling effect. And so I want to thank you for being a part of that.
Well, thank you for that comment, and I'd like to echo that, Dr. Nelson. I think that your procrastination was wonderful in this case, waiting and bringing this book out this year when we really need it. This issue is right front and center, folks, in this year's election campaign in this state and most every state around the country. We have a major election in Minnesota this year. The last book I wrote was with Joan Rowe, and its title is Turnout, Making Minnesota the State That Votes. Let's be that state again this year, folks. We need that to happen on this issue and on a bunch of other ones. Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you.